Mangroves are nurseries for fish and shellfish, but coastal development has led the world's mangroves to shrink by a quarter in the last 20 years. This story comes from the Atlantic coast of Brazil, where a cooperative has been formed to conserve the mangroves for the most prized delicacy it nurtures.
We came to realize that if we collected all oysters, regardless of size, in a couple of years' time there wouldn't be any oysters left for us or for our children to collect.
For nearly 30 years, the Cananeia oyster pickers collected oysters with little thought to future supply. But as they gathered greater numbers from the shrinking mangroves, decline set in and their livelihood was at risk. In the early 1990s, they formed a co-op to safeguard the oyster and its home. They've been so successful that they've received a UN award, the Equator initiative, set up to recognize grassroots efforts to safeguard biodiversity. The collectors head out at low tide so they can reach the oysters attached to the roots of the mangrove trees.
This one's about 6 centimeters and this other one's about 10, which is good for selling. This small one I'll put in the nursery, and in about 2 months it too will have grown to a good commercial size.
The introduction of nurseries is another measure which has relieved pressure on the wild oysters. Now each family has its own beds. These provide an additional benefit: oyster reserves for sale during December to February, the reproduction season, when wild oyster collection is forbidden. Finally, the oysters are bagged and handed over to the collecting boat, which picks them up twice a week from all 48 members of the co-op. From here they go to a purification centre where each collector's batch is cleaned of barnacles and classified by size. It's the size which dictates the price. Quality is also important, and now that they are all purified before being sold, they can earn up to 4 times more per dozen oysters.
In the sterilization process, the oyster functions as a filter. As we fill the tank, the oyster starts filtering the water, and the filtered water is going to clean all their intestines.
The oysters will now sit in the tank for around 8 hours while filtration takes place. They must be eaten within 5 days of being picked. An important part of the cooperative's work is experimentation with oyster cultivation.
It's very important for us, this work. It's also very important for the environment, because we're not only going to collect from the mangroves, we're going to cultivate oysters by capturing oyster seeds from the estuary.
Strips cut from plastic bottles are tied under the water at different points in the estuary. After around 30 days, when they become covered in small oyster seeds, they are transferred to the lanterns to grow further, and when they are around 4 centimeters in size, they are transferred to the nursery. The cooperative's main market is the local restaurants, which cater to the tourist population. This provides adequate income for the 48 members of the co-op. But there are another 78 collectors who aren't members, and until they can be persuaded to join, they'll remain a threat to the long-term sustainability of the oyster catch and the mangroves.